The gospel text of today, which is taken from the Gospel of Mark chapter 1, verses 29 to 39, may seem to be divided into three parts. In the first part, we are introduced to the ministry of Jesus, of making people whole. In the second part, a very important part, we are introduced to the prayer of Jesus. And we are taught through the prayer of Jesus how we are to pray. And in the third part, we are introduced once again to the ministry, but now much more than the ministry, to the mission of Jesus. So you might say the three parts are ministry, prayer, and mission. What is the ministry of Jesus about? After Jesus has exorcised the demon in the Gospel of Mark, which is the first miracle that Jesus works, he comes into the house of Simon and Andrew. And he is told that Simon's mother-in-law is in bed with a fever. That's all he is told. He doesn't need to know anything more. He simply goes to the woman, lifts her by the hand, and the woman gets up. The woman is healed, and she begins to serve. So an indication that she has really been healed from her fever is that she begins to serve them. And through that, Mark is also saying that when those of us who are in good health, we must use our good health not only for ourselves, but we must also use our good health to serve others. Connected with this is that evening, they brought to him so very many that Mark will use hyperbolic language when he tells us the whole city was gathered together at the door. And through this hyperbolic statement, how is it possible for an entire city to be gathered around the door of a particular house? What Mark is actually saying is that those who were sick brought people to Jesus because they could see in him the healer. They could see in him the one to whom they could pour out their hearts. They could see in him a person from whom they could receive that love, and through that love they could be healed. So in a word, the ministry of Jesus in the first part of today's gospel is that the ministry of Jesus is to make people whole, is to remove as far as is possible limitations from their minds and from their hearts, and these limitations are removed through the approach of love which Jesus had. And Jesus in the second part realizes that the strength which he has, the strength which he gets, is a strength which he gets from communion with God. And that is why in the second part, when everyone is still asleep, rising, Mark tells us, very, very early in the morning, he goes away by himself to a lonely place to pray. Mark shows Jesus praying at 3 times in his gospel. And the first is in these verses, Mark chapter 1, verse 35, when Jesus goes away by himself to a lonely place, to a deserted place to pray. And the question is, what is the content of the prayer? The second time Mark shows Jesus praying is after Jesus has fed the 5,000 in Mark chapter 6, verse 46. And the third time, when he gives us the content of the prayer of Jesus, is when he shows Jesus praying in Gethsemane in Mark chapter 14, verses 32 to 42. At that time, he shows Jesus as praying, and he also gives us the content of the prayer of Jesus. And from that content, which we can draw, we can possibly say what Jesus was praying about here. In this instance now, the prayer is a prayer of discernment. Jesus has healed Simon's mother-in-law. He has healed so many others who were brought to him. He has been healing day and night, and people are going away from his presence fuller than they ever were before. And it is likely, it is possible that this popularity may have been getting to Jesus. People are clamoring for his attention. People are clamoring to touch him. People want him to touch them. People want him to bless them. People want him to heal them. And so it is likely that this popularity may have been getting to him. And so he goes to his prayer in order to ask what God's will is. And we can say that because of our association with the prayer of Jesus in Gethsemane, where God's will was at the center. And so this is a prayer of discernment. This is a prayer in which he reflects on his popularity and asks himself whether popularity is more important than God's will. And the conclusion, as we will see in the third part, is that God's will is all important. Because as soon as he finishes his prayer, or rather, even when he is in the midst of his prayer probably, we are not told exactly, but Simon and the companions with him hunt Jesus down. In English, the text is, Simon and those who were with him searched for him, or looked for him, or tried to find him. But the Greek is katadioko. Katadioko is a term used for hunting wild animals. So Simon and his companions were looking as if you look for a wild animal to trap that animal, because they wanted him to remain where he was. They wanted him to be restricted. They wanted him to be narrow and parochial. They wanted his ministry to be in this place because it was a place of acceptance. It was a place where he was comfortable. It was a place where people were thronging to him. And because in his prayer, Jesus has realized that God's will is more important than his own comfort, than his own popularity, than the applause and the applauding of the people. He responds by telling Simon and his companions that he has to go because his mission is much bigger than his ministry. His ministry is a ministry of healing, as has been experienced by the people to whom he reached out. But his mission is the proclamation of the kingdom, which is not a parochial mission, which is not a narrow-minded mission, which is not a restricted mission, but which is a universal mission. And so the words of Jesus are, let us go on to the next towns, that I might preach there also, for this is what I came for. And so, while we continue the ministry of Jesus, which is a ministry to reach out and make people whole by a kind word, by a loving action, and while we go back to God to constantly ask God what God's will is, we realize that mission can never be restricted, Mission is never narrow. Mission is universal. How will you, as a disciple of Jesus, even as you are ministering to others, realize that mission is universal?